Hello, welcome to the Roundtable on Constructive and Solutions Journalism. It's an honor to gather two of the pioneers and most respected journalists in the world, Tina Rosenberg, co-founder of Solutions Journalism Network in the United States. Hi, Tina, thank you.
Hello, nice to be here, thank you.
Great, and Ulrich Hagerup, founder of the Constructive Institute in Denmark. Hi, Ulrich, thank you.
Hi, good to be here.
Well, we are facing huge social challenges, and we wonder, how can journalism provide a better understanding of the world surrounding us, and also a better understanding of our role as citizens? Because the way the media show the world can drive us to be either passive spectators of what's happening around us or active agents of change. Today, more than ever, we have the opportunity to build together a powerful and hopeful collective narrative that allows us to look to the future with the conviction that it's worth working for. We need rigorous information, hope, and inspiration to find a path to action, to be really involved in our communities, in our democracies. So, Ulrich and Tina, in the meantime, social entrepreneurship and its impact remain underreported, as our colleague David Bornstein says. How important is this rigorous coverage of solutions in the news? Tina, you can take that first.
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing that journalists should do is as the medical profession says, do no harm. And I think both Ulrich and his Constructive Institute and we in the United States with the Solutions Journalism Network start with the argument that journalism is giving a very distorted picture of society that does, as you say, Alfredo, lead to fatalistic, passive behavior where we assume nothing works, because in the media, we don't read about anything that works. And especially the way journalism portrays marginalized communities, usually through the lens of the worst possible stereotype. This gives an untrue and a very dangerous picture of what these communities are like. And that has, it's a form of social injustice that actually underlies and supports all other forms of social injustice. So the first thing I think we have to do is stop doing that kind of coverage. Ulrich, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I think it's important to start the conversation by saying, I think both Tina and I, we will say, and Alfredo will say, there's a more need for good journalism than ever. And there's a need for journalism. But I think we come to a point where we have to say that why should journalism be the only profession that we are not obliged to be critical, to have a critical view upon? And maybe we as journalists, the culture we have in our newsrooms, the way we filter the world for people is part of the problem for the democracies we're seeing all over the world. United States as one of the worst examples, Brazil being another one. Mm. But we all think that journalism has to be part of the solution too, because who else should inform the public? Tell people what's new, what's old, what is important, what is just baloney. All that is the purpose of journalism, but not only stress the problems, but also ask the questions, now what and how. And I think we should be much better at doing that. But the most important thing to start with, I think, is there's a need for journalism. This is not about journalism is no good. We need journalism, but we need not more, not faster, but better journalism.
Oh, I agree. And I think to take that even further, we need investigative journalism now more than ever. Neither of us are saying that journalism should only report on what's working. No. But we think the balance should be shifted a little bit so that we include stories on what's working. If you're a parent and you want your kids to do better, and all you do is every day at breakfast point out the 5 things they did wrong the day before, you're a bad parent. That is not a good way of parenting. And that is not how people change. And it's also not how societies change. Societies do not simply change because we point out what's wrong. We need models. We need to see that that someone like me can change, and here's how they've done it. And that's the way society needs also. Cities need to know that another city is doing better on this problem, and therefore I can do better. And that is a hugely important part of how we get to a better future.
And that's the inspiration point. I met with someone the other day and talking, that was not a journalist. It's really terrible talking to somebody who's not a journalist, but sometimes we have to. And I was sitting there talking to this woman and say, you guys, you and your profession, it's like being at a party with somebody sitting next to you and for 3 hours just pointing your shoulder and say, hey, have you seen that? That's terrible. Isn't that dumb? Have you seen that? That's bad too. And that the food is terrible. And do you like these chairs? They're really bad, these chairs. I mean, who wants to be with these people? And
well, that's obviously one reason that journalism is losing readership.
Yes. And that's why people are turning their backs on us.
Yeah.
And that's just to make a little fun of ourselves. But the truth of the matter is that the way we filter the world in general, there's a lot of great journalism out there still. But in general, and especially in the digital age where speed has risen and budgets have shrunken, we basically portray the world in such a way that people think that what is extreme becomes normality. People get a screwed picture of the world. Crime rates are going down, but people are more and more insecure because they think there are home robberies all over the place because we cover it, because we think that generates clicks. That's what's wrong with us. And so I think the next pandemic will be polarization. Also because of the way we portray it due to algorithms of social media, but also the way journalism filters it. We filter the world in such a way that we put people away from each other. And we need to do the opposite.
Think the world is even more polarized than it actually is, because journalists tend to look for the most inflammatory and outrageous actions and quotes on both sides, and then you call it balance. But what happens with that is that people think, oh, that's the way the other side thinks. And it's the way a small percentage of the other side thinks, the most extreme. Mm-hmm. So it actually is a vicious circle that builds on polarization. And that pandemic, Ulrich, we've lost that battle. It's already here. Now we're looking for the vaccine.
Yeah. But when we talk about the polarization, it will be different citizens, groups against each other. Will be cities against the rural districts, the vaccinated against the non-vaccinated, against the rich, against the poor, the losers and the winners of globalization. And more than ever, we need to talk to each other. And I think we both share the vision, or all three of us share the vision, that journalism needs to be conversation leaders in this debate. And it's not about that people should agree all the time, but we need to have people in the public debate, not only with a mouth, but also with ears, right? So can journalism bridge build? That's the big question. And can we find new models, new formats, new way of doing that? And I think that's what's really interesting about journalism, because it works when you do it.
Let me introduce here a matter of preposition. Journalism for the people and journalism with the people. How you were talking about that right now, how to involve the citizens and how important it is for our democracies.
Yeah, I can start by saying we have a local election coming up in about 3 weeks here. And we have been traveling around the country to do workshops for journalists, saying how can we avoid giving the microphone to the most rude, the most loud, and the people with most likes. How can we cover elections constructively? And think about the mindset we have in elections. We call it debates. It comes from French. It means fighting. We talk about, we borrow vocabulary from warfare. We call it duels. We call it crossfire. All victims and losers. We talk about red corner, blue corner. And can we do it differently? And what we have found is that if we do it in another way, start by asking the citizens, what is it actually? What are the problems you want people among you, meaning candidates, meaning potential politicians, to solve for you? And then listen to politicians and candidates. What are their ideas? are they able to work together? And we have come up with formats, which is really interesting. 20 minutes. Politicians put it in a studio, and the walls shrink every 5 minutes, and they have to agree before those 20 minutes. We did 10 programs for 20 minutes in 10 different cities. In 9 of them, I have to find nine of them, they actually agreed on something they hadn't been able to agree on for 4 years, because we changed, with the media company we worked with, the incentive structure of the political debate. So it is possible, but we conduct politics as boxing, it will be, but we need to involve citizens. Also, before we start publishing, what do you want? What are your questions? So I agree completely with you. We should be much better at using our platforms, our media, as means of a dialogue instead of just a new technology for our monologues.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, let me, Tina,
I mean,
because Ulrich talked about this, the Good Fight project, and the television in the island of Fionia is running this experiment. He explained, you guys at the Solution Journalist Network are launching the Advancing Democracy project with 10 newsrooms involved. Maybe you can explain about that, please.
Sure. So we're a little bit different. We work a little bit differently than Ulrich and his Constructive Institute does. We really concentrate on solutions journalism, which is reporting on what works to solve problems. That's a subset of what constructive journalism is. Constructive journalism is broader and also includes a lot of other ways we can improve public dialogue and be more forward-looking and constructive. But what we do is we teach newsrooms, and we've taught probably 500 of them by now. We've worked with 25,000 journalists. We work mostly in the United States, but we have a coordinator in Africa. We have one in France. We have projects in various parts of Central and Eastern Europe. We've had a long-running Latin America project. So we try and show journalists how to do this kind of work, cover what works, not as good news, not as fluff, not as advocacy, not as public relations, but as real journalism, critically, what works about this response, but also what doesn't work about it. There is no such thing as a perfect project. If you claim it's perfect, no one will believe you. So acknowledge what doesn't work. And so that's what we teach. And the Advancing Democracy Project is it's a variation on something we've been working on now for several years, which is to work with newsrooms in all 50 states to do reporting on what is working to improve the functioning of democracy. The difference with the new Advancing Democracy Project is that it's deliberately working with Black and Brown led newsrooms that serve Black and Brown communities, communities of color. And one reason that this is so important to your important question, Alfredo, about journalism with and for people rather than about them, is that the tendency of the mainstream media has been to parachute in to communities of color, very often only on the occasion of a shooting or a crime, because that's the only thing that gets covered in those communities for the most part. And then write about those communities for the benefit of a white audience. And usually it's done to conform to the worst stereotypes that white audiences have about those communities. Now, I'm exaggerating a bit, but this has really been the tendency. And so that has to change. We have to not cover communities of color for a white audience. We have to cover communities of color for themselves and with themselves, looking at what they feel is important about their communities, not just what's going wrong, but also what are they doing to solve their problems? What's happening there that's important that other communities need to know about and learn from. And in this way, we break the stereotypes. It's complicated. One of the newsrooms that we work with is the Montgomery Advertiser in Montgomery, Alabama, which is in the American South. And the first time I went there, I asked them, what do you folks think of the way mainstream media covers Alabama? And they all said, oh, we hate it. It's terrible. Why? Because you always make us look like ignorant yahoos. You come here and you look for the people with 4 teeth. And that's true. That's true. I mean, a lot goes on in Alabama and other places that don't make them look like ignorant yahoos. But the media is not really interested in that. We're just interested in the stuff that conforms to their stereotype that they're uneducated hicks. However, what's really interesting is that the way the Montgomery Advertiser covered their own city was exactly the same.
Yeah,
but for
exactly.
the communities of color. They only went into Black Montgomery, which is a majority of the city. The only person who went in there was the crime reporter. The rest of the newsroom stayed out because the rest was not news. Just the crime was defined as news. So their own critique of how they were covered also applies to how they covered their own community. And now that's changed. They're doing a lot of stories now from Black Montgomery that look at what's going on that's solving our problems. What's going on here that is important, that isn't just crime. And so that's what we mean when we say not just about, but for and with. So you are absolutely right about that, Alfredo.
Ulrich, what about Denmark? Probably it's not as diverse as the United States, but how you feel about that?
But it resonates completely with how the press is working not only in the United States, but basically everywhere. Just think about how Africa is being covered. Ask anybody, what do you think about when I say the word Africa? And they will most likely say starvation, they will say hopelessness, they will say Ebola, they will say civil war, they will say all kind of stuff. And that's I've been a news director of a public service company in Denmark for 10 years. And for many years, we only sent news crews to Africa if there was a civil war, if there was a problem, or another HIV reportage we could do. And of course, that created a mindset among our viewers about citizens that this is completely hopeless in Africa. That's a shithole, right? The problem is, exactly as Tina talked about before, African media, they're doing exactly the same because they think that's journalism. A good story has to be a bad one.
Yeah.
So they cover crime, they cover corruption, and of course they should. They cover the hole in the roads, but they never cover when the hole is fixed. So if you are a young person in Africa, 26-year-old fit guy, and look around yourself and look at your phone where you see all the news from Africa, you see hopelessness. And that's why a lot of a new generation in Africa, they think their future is at another continent. So they risk their lives sitting in rubber boats crossing the Mediterranean. So again, I think it's important to stress that what we talk about is not some kind of North Korean version of journalism where you ignore problems and paint the sky blue. I think it's Tina's colleague, David Bornstein, who put it very well, saying journalism is a feedback mechanism that helps society self-correct. So we should cover the problems, but in order to have generate a debate about how can it be fixed, inspire people, what can it be done? So if you want to change the narrative of Africa, you have to change the journalism of Africa. If you have to change the narrative of Black people and brown people and Trump voters in the United States, you might want to listen to them and try to cover what's going on. And the same thing in our part of the world.
What's interesting, I think, well, lots is interesting about this, but one thing that's particularly interesting is that non-journalists get this instantly. They totally agree with this. And they think, why is it that journalists have so much trouble with the idea? But we do. Journalists have a lot of trouble with this idea because we are, raised from journalism infancy to think that, as Ulrich says, a good story has to be a bad story.
That's the Watergate Syndrome, right? We want to bring down presidents, which is a problem when you live in a monarchy. We don't have presidents. So then we have to find somebody else we can bring down in order to win prizes.
Yeah. But, journalists understand now that, and this is a very traditionally defensive profession that has been resistant to change. But not now, because now we have these twin crises, this economic crisis where the death of advertising has taken place, and also this existential crisis of nobody likes us, nobody trusts us. Who are we? What are we for? And there's a lot of experimentation going on, which is very, very good. So journalism is now open to rethinking things in a different way than it ever has been before. And journalists understand that their readers don't want a steady diet of dysfunction and corruption and failure. And we're frankly tired of reporting on it, but they are afraid to try reporting on what works because they don't want it coming out like fluff or advocacy, because those are these cardinal sins there. So what we have to do as the Solutions Journalism Network is teach them how to do those stories with high journalistic standards. And once they do, journalists are completely willing to do that.
And especially a new generation of reporters, when they get this and say, hey, this is exactly the reason why I wanted to become a reporter. I don't want to spend my time doing clickbaits or stories where we have the headline before we do our research. I want to do this. I want to inspire. I want to enlighten. I want to engage people. And when they find out that's also good journalism, then they lighten up. And when the CFO of a news organization understand that this is not only good for self-esteem and for democracy, but also for bottom line.
It is actually,
and it is, then it changes. So I'm equally optimistic as Tina is. A lot of things. No editor, no journalist around the world can say, we do as we have always done, because we know we'll get the results we always gotten, and they're not very good.
Definition of insanity.
Yeah, you're right.
All right. If we talk about the future, how do you visualize this transformative role and this leadership role, social leadership role of the media? And what should we expect from journalism in the coming years?
Well, I feel that journalism should be careful not to become advocates. And I'm a very traditional journalist in this sense. We don't want people saying, here's how to solve this problem. What we want people to do is say, let's cover how other folks have solved this problem and see what insights we can glean from that. And then people and societies make their own decisions. So I don't want to see journalism as a decision maker or political leader, but I do want to see journalism provide the kind of coverage that allows society to better make those decisions. I think that's where it's heading.
And I completely agree. And I think if we are very smart, we think about, if you go out on the street in any of our cities or countries and ask people, do you need more news? Do you need faster news? Do you need more information in your lives? We know exactly what they will all answer. No thanks, but we do need better. So the mindset of our profession should maybe change from thinking that we are providers of information and more of it on more and more platforms, that we are providers of navigation. Why is this navigation tool valuable for us? Why do we turn it on each time we go out of our room? Not because it tells you where you are, where you came from, but it actually gives you updated, trustworthy choices on, if you go left, it will take you this. If you go right, you will end up there. But it makes you able to make more qualified choices in your life. And I think if we see journalism as not as information tools, but navigation tools, we have a future. And I think there's a great future for journalism if we think about that. But it's mainly a mindset thing. And that's why both Tina's organization and Mark say we work for exactly the same goal, changing the mindset of journalism in order to help journalism help democracy. That's what it's all about. And I'm pretty optimistic about it.
Great. We need to wrap up, but I'd like to connect what you said. Do we need to listen more and listen louder? Have you sometimes said, and Tina, what do you believe? We have to be especially listeners, as you said during this conversation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, journalism has always used the sort of sage on the stage model, where we expound about here's how it is. And we need to be more like the guide on the side, where we are working with our communities and think of them as communities, not as audiences. This should not be a one-way communication. Working with them to understand better what is the coverage they need, what matters to them. We all have dwindling resources, but how can we use those scarce resources in the highest value way? And listening is the key to that.
Can I say, I agree. Then I had a conversation with a CEO of a museum, art museum. He says, the big trend among art museums around the world is ask the audience, what do you want? And what do they want? They all want more Picasso, Matisse, or if they are in Northern Europe, Monk, because they know that and they like it and they just want it more and they want it cheaper and maybe faster. So his saying is, and he's running the most successful art museum in Northern Europe. He's saying the idea of an art museum, we are storytellers and our job is with our professionalism to give people what they do not know they will end up loving. We have to have the courage to make decisions on behalf of people. And then, of course, if they don't like it, we have a problem. But I'm so afraid with all the KPIs we have, all the digital tools we have, where any editor, any journalist can see how many people clicked on that story, how many people shared that story. Because if you can't measure what is important, what you can measure will become what is important. And I see so many newsrooms now focusing on just giving people more of what they click on. And that's not journalism. That's turning journalism into a very primitive product. We are much more than that.
Okay, that should be all. Thank you, Ulrich Hagerup and Tina Rosenberg, for your time and for sharing with us your thoughts. And thank you all for your attention. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Difícilmente se va a producir un cambio sin el aval de los medios de comunicación, que son el cuarto poder. Y necesitamos que realmente den un apoyo en la línea que ahora nos contaban en esta mesa redonda. Y es muy importante que este cambio se perciba y que este movimiento se perciba desde un ángulo completamente apolítico. Necesitamos que todos los partidos políticos apoyen este movimiento y ninguno se lo haga demasiado suyo, para que los otros no se pongan en contra. Porque el cambio hacia el impacto lo hacen todos. Nosotros lo venimos repitiendo en este Impact Forum. Hemos tenido críticas pues, porque invitamos a Globo, porque está CaixaBank o Repsol, pero nosotros defendemos que el cambio lo hacen todos y lo hacen también todos los partidos políticos. Es un cambio, el cambio hacia el impacto, que encaja con la economía liberal, encaja con la economía social, encaja con todas las perspectivas políticas que puedan haber. Y en este cambio encajan también las empresas activistas, las que han nacido verdes, pero también las petroleras, las empresas de moda efímera o las de alimentos procesados. Las empresas guays de fintech, de blockchain, pero también los grandes bancos como el Citibank o CaixaBank, los Teslas, pero también los SEAT y los Renault, los superacuerdos multilaterales como el de la COP26, pero también los gobiernos autonómicos y locales, las ONGs, pero también las asociaciones de barrios o las asociaciones profesionales, los billonarios, pero también los ciudadanos corrientes, los países ricos, pero también los China, los India, las Áfricas, y eso implica necesariamente contrapartidas, incentivos y sobre todo, mucha inteligencia colectiva.
Y cerramos el día con una sesión muy especial porque queremos precisamente hablar de todo eso. Lo que queremos proponer, de lo que queremos hablar en el último panel del día es de la necesidad de replantear el sistema capitalista tal y como lo hemos conocido hasta ahora. Es cierto que el capitalismo ha sido el motor de nuestra sociedad, nos ha llevado a la innovación, a introducir muchas mejoras tecnológicas, a mejorar nuestra vida, a generar riqueza económica en nuestra sociedad, pero al mismo tiempo el propio sistema capitalista también ha llevado a unos excesos que se han traducido en impactos medioambientales brutales. La emergencia del cambio climático es una realidad. Y también a incrementar en algunos casos las desigualdades sociales, y eso no lo podemos permitir. Seguimos creyendo que el sistema capitalista puede ser un buen sistema siempre y cuando sepamos cómo redefinirlo, cómo rediseñarlo. Y para hablar sobre eso, sobre cómo podemos rediseñar el sistema capitalista para que trabaje en pro del impacto, para que nos ayude no solo a seguir generando riqueza económica, sino también a resolver los grandes retos que tenemos como sociedad, tenemos a Tim Jackson, profesor y escritor que ha publicado recientemente Post-Growth, Life After Capitalism. Y para esta entrevista contamos con Marión Sánchez del equipo Ship2Be, que lo ha entrevistado.